Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
And this one is going to be really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
So picture this, right? Hollywood, a $400 million lawsuit, Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. It all stems from their film. It ends with us,
Yeah.
based on Colleen Hoover's best-selling book. And yeah, things kind of went off script
Oh, yeah.
in a big way.
For sure. For sure.
So we're going to be looking at a legal complaint and a countersuit in this deep dive. So get ready, because we're going to be hearing two very different sides of the story.
Absolutely. This case really delves into those power dynamics that we see at play in Hollywood filmmaking. And yeah, before we jump to conclusions, I think it's super important to carefully consider both sides.
Okay, let's unpack this whole thing. So initially, this collaboration between Lively and Baldoni seemed like a dream team.
Yeah.
Baldoni gets the rights to the book. Colleen Hoover loves his vision for it. He casts Lively as the lead. They were even texting each other, like super friendly, giddy texts, with Lively at one point saying, "It just clicks when we find it. This is why we do it." So where did it all go wrong?
Well, and that's what makes this story so interesting. That initial kind of honeymoon phase quickly dissolved, which I think emphasizes how fragile some of these relationships can be in a high-pressure environment like Hollywood.
Yeah, and here's where things get really interesting, right?
Okay.
Early on, we start to see signs that Lively is, she's really assertive, particularly when it comes to the creative decisions. She had very specific ideas about the wardrobe, even rewrote a scene that was on a rooftop.
Wow.
And get this, she brings in Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds to back her up, even texting Baldoni saying that they aren't afraid of threatening egos.
Oh, wow.
That's a power move.
Yeah. Is that typical for an A-lister to have that much sway?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, A-list actors often have a certain degree of influence,
Right.
but this level of assertiveness, it makes you kind of wonder, where are those boundaries? Collaboration's key, but this could come across as a power play, right?
Yeah.
Or just trying to exert more control over the film.
Yeah, and then we get to this 17-point list of demands that Lively presents to Baldoni before she'll come back on set after the Writers Guild strike.
Oh, okay.
Some of them were pretty standard, like having an intimacy coordinator, but others were,
A little more out there.
a little more out there, yeah.
Okay.
And, one thing that the legal complaint emphasizes is that Lively didn't sign the nudity rider.
Right, right. And that's an important document for protecting actors during sensitive scenes.
Absolutely. So what's the legal side of that? Like, what happens if an actor doesn't sign a nudity rider?
Well, basically, without a signed writer, her legal protection regarding those scenes could be compromised, right? Raises all sorts of questions about consent, potential exploitation, and then it complicates things further when disputes arise later on, which is exactly what happened here.
Yeah, and then there's the whole thing with Lively accusing Baldoni's team of showing her pornography.
Oh, wow.
But Baldoni says he was just sharing about his own struggles with porn addiction after Lively mentioned she had never seen it. This is getting messy.
Oh, for sure. So these conflicting accounts, they create this legal gray area, right? And it's all about clear communication and consent on a set, especially when you're dealing with sensitive topics.
Yeah.
And with the differing narratives, it makes it hard to really determine if any lines were crossed.
Yeah.
And that becomes a central issue in a harassment claim.
Yeah, okay, but wait.
There's more.
There's more, because Baldoni's countersuit flips the script. He's alleging that Lively was actually the one manipulating situations, even citing evidence of her inviting him to her trailer while undressed.
Oh, wow.
He also claims that she was the one improvising kisses while they were filming, which contradicts her claims of discomfort,
Right.
and insists that he was constantly trying to meet her demands.
It really becomes this battle of perceptions, with both sides bringing evidence to support their version of events. Classic he said, she said scenario. Super hard to figure out the truth.
And hold on, there's even more. Baldoni's countersuit even brings Ryan Reynolds into the fray, claiming that he was physically intimidating on set.
Oh, really?
Yeah, demanding certain scenes be cut.
Wow.
And even allegedly trying to get Baldoni dropped by his agency.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, talk about power dynamics, right?
Yeah, I mean, Reynolds' alleged involvement just adds a whole other layer to that power dynamic, right? It suggests that Lively's influence may be extended beyond just her actions on set. And it raises these questions about how these power couples can impact a film's production.
Okay, and here's a bombshell.
Yeah.
Baldoni even claims that Lively went and created her own cut of the film.
Wow.
even though his version scored higher with test audiences. Is that even allowed?
Well, typically those director's cuts and final edits are negotiated super carefully.
Right.
Lively's involvement in the editing process is definitely unusual, and
Yeah.
it suggests that she was wielding a lot of power behind the scenes.
Okay, so we've got conflicting accounts, this potential power struggle,
Yes.
and then this premiere that sounds like a powder keg.
Yeah.
What went down?
Well, the premiere was reportedly pretty tense. Baldoni was almost banned. Lively allegedly had a lot of control over his access. And I think this incident really underscores how important public image is in Hollywood and how events like this can make or break careers.
And just to add fuel to the fire, Baldoni claims that Lively's publicist, Leslie Sloan, was feeding all these negative stories about him to the press, even after she had agreed to coordinate communication with his crisis manager.
This takes us deep into that cutthroat world of Hollywood PR, right? Where loyalty and ethics can get pretty blurry when you're trying to protect a client's image.
And it gets even more complicated because during the film's promotion, there were a bunch of articles that came out criticizing Lively for seemingly downplaying the serious themes of domestic abuse that were in the book, you know?
Right, and Baldoni's team actually claims that that negative press was a direct result of Lively's own choices when it came to promoting the film. They specifically point to these lighthearted Instagram posts that she was putting up that,
Oh, yeah.
to some fans and survivors, came across as kind of tone deaf, especially given the subject matter of the film.
So, like, her social media strategy basically backfired
Exactly.
and unintentionally fueled the narrative that Baldoni's team was already pushing.
Precisely. It's a prime example of how social media can completely backfire,
Yep.
especially when you're dealing with these sensitive topics.
Okay, so this is like, it's getting intense. It's not just about what happened on set. It's about how both sides are trying to control the whole narrative.
Absolutely. It's a carefully choreographed dance.
Mm-hmm.
They're strategically moving to try and get an advantage in the court of public opinion.
Right.
And the stakes are huge because perceptions can have a real lasting impact on their careers.
Yeah, and so how did these accusations of, like, media manipulation fit into the bigger legal picture? What are the legal ramifications here?
Well, proving media manipulation in court is actually super hard.
Really?
You have to show a deliberate and coordinated effort to spread false information with malicious intent.
Got it.
So while Baldoni's lawsuit against the New York Times is bold,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be really difficult to win that one legally.
And what about the publicists in all this?
Right.
Can they be held legally accountable for this negative press that's surrounding their clients?
Well, they have to be really careful.
Mm-hmm.
They're advocates for their clients, but they also have to be truthful and avoid spreading misinformation. If a publicist knowingly takes part in a smear campaign or does something unethical,
Yeah.
they could face repercussions, maybe even lawsuits.
Wow, this case is like, it's a huge reminder that the fight for public opinion can be just as intense
Yeah.
as the legal battle.
Absolutely.
And it makes you think about the importance of media literacy, right? We need to be critical of the information we're consuming, consider where it's coming from, potential biases, and the possibility that there could be manipulation going on.
Exactly, especially in these high-profile cases.
Yeah, okay, so we've covered a lot about the he said, she said, and the whole media circus, but we can't forget the money involved here. Baldoni's asking for a mind-blowing $400 million in damages?
Yeah, that's a huge number.
Even for Hollywood.
Even for Hollywood, yeah, their lawsuits are almost entertainment in themselves.
Right.
But we have to remember that's just what he's asking for. The actual outcome, it could be very different, especially in a case like this, where the evidence is so disputed.
So help us understand this.
Yeah.
What are the possible legal outcomes? Could he actually win $400 million?
Well, it is possible for a jury to award a lot of money in cases involving defamation and extortion and breach of contract, but it's highly unlikely they'd go that high. They tend to be a bit more conservative with their awards, especially in these he said, she said cases.
So even if he wins, he might not be walking away with a Hollywood payday.
Exactly. And the money is just one piece of this whole thing, right?
Right.
The damage to their reputations, that could be way more significant no matter what the monetary outcome ends up being.
That's a really good point. This whole saga has already had an impact on their public image,
For sure.
even though we still don't know the full truth.
Yeah, that's just the nature of these public battles.
Right.
The accusations themselves, even if they're disproven, they can leave a stain on a person's career.
It's like a ripple effect
Yeah.
going outwards with all these consequences.
Absolutely.
And this case could even have bigger implications for the whole industry.
Right.
I mean, it raises so many questions about how power works on set, the role of publicists,
Yeah.
and how these kinds of disputes might be handled in the future.
It's a much bigger conversation than just these two individuals.
Okay, thinking back on all the evidence we've discussed,
Yeah.
it feels almost impossible to say definitively who's telling the truth. What do you think is the most important takeaway here?
Well, I think it's fascinating how this case just highlights these blurred lines between truth and perception and power.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds us that even in this age of information overload,
Yeah.
where social media is everywhere, it can still be really hard to figure out what's actually true.
Yeah.
And the people with the most influence and power, they can often shape the narrative to benefit themselves.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we need to be critical
For sure.
when we're looking at these kinds of stories and not rush to judgment.
Definitely.
So we've got to be discerning, think about the sources, possible biases, and the potential for manipulation, especially in high-profile cases.
Exactly.
Well, that's part one of our deep dive into the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuit drama. But the story isn't over yet, so stay tuned for part two.
We'll uncover even more details, explore the potential fallout, and what this all means for Hollywood.
So until then, keep thinking critically, and we'll catch you in part two. Okay, so we're back, and we're diving even deeper into this Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuit. And this time, we're really going to focus on this whole battle for public opinion. It's not just a legal showdown, it's like a full-blown PR war with accusations of media manipulation, smear campaigns, you name it.
Yeah, it's fascinating how public perception can be shaped by these carefully constructed narratives, especially in this day and age with social media being so powerful.
Right. It's like a whole other layer to this.
Right. Absolutely. Both Baldoni and Lively, they're fighting not only in the courtroom, but also in the court of public opinion, which can be just as crucial.
It's like 4D chess.
It really is.
Okay, so let's break down some of these alleged instances of media manipulation.
Okay.
One piece of this whole puzzle that stands out is this New York Times article.
Oh, yeah.
We can bury anyone.
Right. That was huge.
That was a bombshell.
That article really painted Baldoni as the mastermind behind this PR campaign to discredit Lively. But he completely denies those accusations.
Right, and he claims that the article was based on, cherry-picked information, and it was all part of a larger scheme to damage his reputation.
Right.
And he didn't just sit back and take it, right?
No, she didn't. He actually sued the New York Times for $250 million.
Wow.
Accusing them of defamation and alleging that they were colluding with Lively. And he even points to the timing of the article. It was published just one day after Lively filed her complaint.
That's interesting, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, that's a pretty bold move. And, of course, the New York Times is denying all of these claims. They're standing by their reporting, saying it was thoroughly researched and based on tons of documents, including text messages and emails.
But Baldoni's countersuit goes even further. It implicates Lively's publicist, Leslie Sloan, in this alleged smear campaign, claiming that she was the one feeding negative stories to the press, even after agreeing to coordinate communication with his crisis manager.
Right. It's a classic example of that cutthroat world of Hollywood PR, where personal relationships and ethical boundaries can get really murky when you're trying to protect a client's image.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that Baldoni's lawsuit even includes text messages
Right.
that allegedly show Sloan telling reporters that the whole cast disliked him, and that the issues on set had nothing to do with Lively.
That's harsh.
Yeah, talk about throwing someone under the bus.
Right. Okay, and let's not forget about all those negative articles that were circulating about Lively during the film's promotion.
The ones that were criticizing her for seemingly downplaying the serious themes of domestic abuse in the book.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting because Baldoni's team actually claims that that negative press was a direct result of Lively's own promotional choices.
Right.
Marketing the film in this lighthearted manner, which didn't sit well with a lot of fans and survivors.
So it's like she unintentionally gave Baldoni's team ammo.
Exactly, to push their own agenda.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how these well-intentioned social media strategies can just backfire, especially when you're dealing with a topic as sensitive as domestic abuse.
Okay, so this is getting more and more complex.
Yeah.
It's not just about what happened on the set. It's about this whole battle to control the narrative.
Absolutely. It's like a carefully choreographed dance where each side is strategically maneuvering to try and get the upper hand in the court of public opinion.
And the stakes are really high.
Oh, yeah,
because all of this can affect their careers.
for sure. And future opportunities.
So how do these accusations of media manipulation fit into the bigger picture, legally speaking? What could happen?
Well, it's actually really hard to prove media manipulation in a court of law.
Real.
You have to show that there was this deliberate and coordinated effort to spread false information with the intention of causing harm.
Wow.
So Baldoni's lawsuit against the New York Times, it's a long shot.
Mm-hmm.
Legally speaking, it's going to be tough to win.
And what about the publicist's role in all of this?
Right.
Can they be held legally responsible for this negative press that's surrounding their clients?
Well, publicists kind of walk a fine line.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're advocates for their clients, but they also have this ethical obligation to be truthful and avoid spreading false information.
Right.
So if a publicist knowingly participates in a smear campaign or does something unethical,
Yeah.
they could definitely face repercussions, maybe damage to their reputation, or even lawsuits.
Well, this whole case is such a stark reminder that the battle for public opinion can be just as fierce as the legal battle.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes the importance of media literacy, right? We need to be critical consumers of information.
Yeah.
Think about the sources, consider any potential biases,
Right.
and always be aware of the possibility of manipulation, especially in high-profile cases like this.
Okay, so we've talked about the he said, she said, the media frenzy.
Right.
But let's not forget about the money.
Yes.
Baldoni's asking for a whopping $400 million in damages,
It's an eye-popping figure.
even in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, even in Hollywood.
But it's important to remember that's just what he's seeking.
Right.
The actual outcome could be completely different, especially with a case like this,
Absolutely.
where the evidence is so contested. So help us understand this. What are the potential legal outcomes? Is it actually possible for him to win $400 million?
Well, juries can award substantial damages in these kinds of cases involving defamation, extortion, breach of contract, but $400 million, that's a really high bar. Juries tend to be more conservative with their awards, especially in these he said, she said cases.
So even if he wins, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be walking away with a massive Hollywood payday.
Exactly. And the money is really just one piece of this whole puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
The damage to their reputations.
Right.
That might be the most significant consequence regardless of what happens with the money.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This whole saga has already tarnished their public image,
Absolutely.
even though we still don't have a clear picture of the truth.
And that's the unfortunate reality of these very public legal battles.
Mm-hmm.
Just the accusations themselves, even if they're eventually disproven, can leave a stain on a person's career.
So it's like a ripple effect
They-
going
yeah.
outwards with all these unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And this case might have much broader implications for Hollywood as a whole. It raises these critical questions about the dynamics of power on set, the role of publicists, and how similar disputes might be handled going forward.
It's like this case is a window into a much bigger story that's unfolding in the entertainment industry.
Precisely. And it makes us think about how power is negotiated, how reputations are built and destroyed, and how we as a society consume and interpret information, especially in this age of instant news and social media.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Of course.
But I'm still left wondering what happens next.
Right.
What's the next chapter of this legal saga?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's hard to say for sure. But the next steps could involve discovery, where both sides exchange evidence. Then there might be depositions where witnesses are questioned under oath, and potentially a whole series of legal motions and counter motions.
So this legal drama is far from over.
Oh, yeah, this could go on for years.
It could be years before we know the final outcome.
Absolutely. This case has more twists and turns than a Hollywood blockbuster. And we're all just watching to see how the next scene unfolds.
Well, buckle up, everybody, because this roller coaster ride isn't over yet. Stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll explore the potential legal outcomes, the lasting impact on both Lively and Baldoni's careers, and the wider implications for Hollywood as a whole.
All right, so we've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive going through all the twists and turns of this Hollywood legal drama. We've looked at the accusations, we've seen the evidence, and we've talked about how each side is trying to win over the public. But now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what could happen next. I mean, what are the possible outcomes of this lawsuit?
Well, there are a few different ways this could play out. One scenario is that they settle out of court, which is pretty common, actually, in these high-profile cases.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they'd come to an agreement, usually involving some confidential sum of money.
Right.
And that way they can avoid the spotlight and all the mounting legal fees.
So they kind of just shake hands, agree to disagree, and try to move on.
Exact. But what if they can't agree on a settlement? What happens then?
Well, if a settlement's not on the table, the next step would be a trial.
Right.
Which means lawyers, witnesses, evidence presented in front of a judge and jury, the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And that route tends to be a lot more expensive, and it takes much longer, and the outcome is much less predictable.
And what about that $400 million figure that Baldoni's asking for? I mean, is that realistic at all? Could a jury actually award that much money?
Well, it's not impossible for juries to give out big sums of money in cases like this, involving defamation, extortion, breach of contract, all that. But $400 million, that's a really high number.
Yeah.
Juries usually are a bit more conservative, especially when the evidence is so back and forth, like in this case.
So even if Baldoni wins this whole thing,
Right.
it doesn't mean he's going to be walking away with this giant Hollywood payday.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the money is just one part of this whole equation, right? The damage to their reputations, that could be way more significant no matter what the final number ends up being.
That's a good point. This whole ordeal has already had a pretty big impact on how the public sees them.
For sure.
Even though we don't even know the full truth yet.
That's the tough part about these very public legal battles.
Yeah.
Just the accusations themselves, even if they turn out to be false, can really hurt a person's career.
It's like a ripple effect,
Yeah.
It goes outwards with all these consequences.
Absolutely. And this case might actually have some bigger implications for Hollywood as a whole.
Really? How so?
Well, it raises some really important questions about how power works on set, the role of publicists, and how these kinds of disputes might be handled in the future.
Yeah, it's like this whole case is a microcosm of some bigger issues that are happening in the industry.
Exactly. And it makes us think about how power is negotiated, how reputations are built and destroyed, and even how we as a society consume and interpret information, especially in this age of social media and instant news.
Looking back at everything we've discussed, it feels impossible to say for sure who's telling the truth. What do you think is the most important takeaway from all of this?
What really stands out to me is how this whole case highlights how blurry the lines can be between truth, perception, and power. It's a good reminder that even in today's world, with all the information out there and social media and everything, figuring out the truth can be really, really tough. And often, the people with the most power and influence, they're the ones who can shape the narrative to benefit themselves.
So it's a good reminder that we shouldn't just take things at face value, right?
Exactly.
We need to look at things critically, consider all sides,
Yeah.
and not jump to conclusions.
Absolutely.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into this Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuit drama has come to an end. But the story itself, it's far from over. We'll keep you posted on any big developments that happen.
And in the meantime, I think it's worth thinking about the evidence we've talked about, the different perspectives, and maybe even challenge your own assumptions about how Hollywood really works. Remember, things aren't always what they seem.
And the next time you see a glamorous premiere or a perfect Instagram post, remember there might be a whole lot more going on behind the scenes. So stay curious, stay informed, and join us next time for another deep dive as we explore some more captivating topics that'll really make you think.